almost heaven. West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. Life is all there, older than the trees, younger than the mountains, blowing like the breeze. Country road.
Survival horror games were not uncommon in the early 2010s. In fact, the market was seemingly oversaturated with cheap indie horror experiences created only to elicit a cheap scare out of you, featuring barely any survival elements in an attempt to go into pure horror, which, for the most part, did not produce amazing results. Amongst the sea of wasted potential, however, one game rose to the top of the survival horror genre, and its name was The Forest. It created a tense atmosphere along with a complete disregard for handholding, leaving the player up to themselves to piece together the story and survive the hostile island filled to the brim with hungry cannibals. Welcome to Development Devil. Today we'll be diving into The Forest's creative minds and their journey to where they are today, and how The Forest shook up the survival horror genre throughout its 6-year development period. The Forest began development in 2013, being worked on by the indie studio Endnight, named after their first project, an iPad-exclusive game of the same name. The Forest was the studio's second project and was manned by a total of 4 team members at the beginning of the development cycle. Unity was Endnight's game engine of choice when it came to deciding how to create their game. The first trailer for The Forest would be released on May 8, 2013, revealing early mechanics such as base building and giving players a first look at the main enemies of the game, the cannibals. In this trailer you can still see a lot of the graphics still in a very plasticky state, but for the most part the game looked as if it would be a game that finally puts the survival into survival horror. Now, because this was in the old days of Steam, before its seal of quality peeled off into a combine harvester, indie games like The Forest would require to be voted in by the Steam community through the Steam Greenlight functionality. Luckily it would be greenlit later that year, and the second trailer will be released on the 11th of November that same year, showing off more of the cannibals' behaviours, a dynamic weather system, natural flora and fauna, as well as effigies and the smooth animations being implemented into the game, such as that absolutely exquisite tree chopping animation. Trailer 2 also showed off more of the horror aspect of the game, with a small teaser of the cave exploration that would be later revealed to be a way to get almost all key story items in the game. The next year, on the 20th of March 2014, the third trailer would drop, showing off the plane crash opening, new traps to spring on cannibals, fishing, refined base building, the luscious caves, and finally, the terrifyingly deadly mutants. At the end of the video it also revealed the release date for the early access build, May 20th. And so, after a little over a year of excitement building, Endnight was ready to give the public access to their latest creation. And it was amazing. When releasing a game on Steam in an early access state, you have to get the players who try your game on your side, build trust to show them that the final product will be even better and bigger than what you are currently selling to them. Often this is done by the developers releasing an early version of the game with no story, a bare-bones experience featuring mostly gameplay experiences, but Endnight decided to go a different route. Instead of slowly patching in story over the years similar to a game like Raft, they added a beginning story of your plane crashing on a remote island, with your son being taken away by a cannibal. After this, the game lets you roam free on the island, but along the way you would find clues as to where Timmy, your son, is. This led to the feeling that every time you found a new area it would uncover a new part of the story, giving players another reason to explore other than finding new equipment. After the first version of The Forest that was publicly released on May 20th, 2014, the game was very well received, being picked up by various Let's Play YouTube channels, and so Endnight got hard to work to continue updating the game with more content to satiate their growing fanbase. Seeing as there are a huge number of updates throughout the years of The Forest's early access period, I will only be mentioning major updates and things that were added which I think are important. If you want a full comprehensive list of every update, go look it up. One of the first major additions to the game, multiplayer, was added in version 0.09, but the original system was not using the Steam multiplayer system available to developers using the platform, so shortly after in version 0.12, multiplayer functionality was integrated into Steam. Multiplayer would later become a massive part of the appeal of the Forest, and also helped Let's Players get into it as it would be more interesting to viewers if there were multiple creators playing the same video game together. The multiplayer aspect of the Forest was what originally got me to play the Forest, as I'm not a big fan of horror games, so having someone to share the experience which helped immensely to make the game more accessible not only to me, but all the pussies of the world. Throughout development, Endnight would occasionally drop more story items into the game, as well as new movement items such as the climbing axe, which would eventually be utilized as one of the 3 items required to complete the game with. Endnight's commitment to constantly updating the game with new items and bug fixes really helped create a sense that the final product would be a massive experience you wouldn't want to miss out on. And with the additions of chainsaws, sharks, rafts, and new cannibal buildings and interactions, that final product edged ever closer to becoming reality. Fueled by an insane amount of support from fans and massive content creators such as Jacksepticeye, how could they mess this up? Now, this is usually where I would talk about all of the stuff they ruined, what went wrong in the development cycle, who to blame, employee drama, whatever. But to be honest, this might be one of the rare occasions where that just doesn't happen. The Forest really is just a game that was passionately worked on for years and then released. So, seeing as I've got nothing better to do, how about we go a bit off course for this special episode of Development Devil, and actually review the game. No, I'm not padding for runtime, that would be ridiculous. The Forest is a game that knows how to build suspense. Everywhere on the map is filled with dangerous cannibals, but you never know where they could be. This leads to a terrifying effect where you always feel as if you are being watched, as if anything could just creep up behind you and take away your life. This leads to players always playing cautiously and almost forces you into a careful, methodical approach to combat. Unless you are using one of the few overpowered weapons such as the gun or chainsaw, combat is always a two-way street with a truck of attacks headed one way and a single slow attack-filled two-seater on the other. You are the two-seater. If you mess up in combat, you will die quickly. This adds to the tension of exploring caves and uncovering secrets of the island you are trapped on. The game is separated into 3 sections which all merge together to create a soup of survival horror goodness. The first section is the most prevalent, survival. The survival segment of the Forest begins as soon as you leave the plane crash site. The icons in the bottom of your screen tell you what you need, food and water. With the axe in hand, it is up to the player to decide how they will come across these basic necessities. For many, it is to open up luggage strewn across the ground. Others to hunt rabbits and birds by scavenging sticks and stones to craft crude instruments to attack with. Or the more sneakier type might choose to enter one of the many close-by cannibal camps to attempt a heist of their supplies they have ravaged the plain for. Either way, food is a must-have in this harsh environment. Speaking of the environment, rain and nighttime will lead you to becoming cold, which will soon turn to frostbite and hypothermia, which can slowly whittle away your health as well as impair your vision. If you are unlucky enough to eat some poisonous berries, this can also lead to you being afflicted with a disease that will then need to be treated using other naturally occurring plants on the island. This need for resources will plague you until the end of the game, so to say that the survival elements prevalent in the Forest are important would be an understatement. But at the same time, it feels like an annoyance at times. I understand that the game is all about realism, but the way stamina depletes its maximum until you drink replenishing liquids such as soda makes finding new resources to keep yourself alive tedious, as a majority of the time unless you stock up in your base, you will probably find yourself almost constantly hungry or thirsty. A problem which lots of survival games still face to this day. I understand that Endnight couldn't be upright and remove the need for food to survive. I'm just saying that the speed at which your hunger and thirst diminishes is far too quick. Also, the game needs more healing items. The second part of the Forest is something players will find to be the most time-consuming yet essential if you wish to live long and prosper. Base building. To protect yourself in a harsh and unnatural environment, you would need shelter, and the ways the Forest provides the players to create their home away from home is filled to the brim with options. Treehouses, ziplines, farms, roller coasters, mountain-sized towers, traps to keep trespassers away, and even the designs for a freaking church. I must have spent dozens of hours in the Forest designing and building the most elaborate and stupid base ideas, only for them to come together perfectly. And yet, whilst the way you build almost every structure is simply using wood from trees, which I definitely feel could have been expanded upon, is quite solid, it kind of takes away from the fun of repeat playthroughs. Once you've built a base and gotten most of the buildings built, you've basically done it all. Unless you're one of those complete psychopaths who spends weeks building elaborate fortresses and mazes to appease some sick fascination with architecture they've had bottled up inside until now. And grinding for resources to build some of the absolute monoliths available to construct simply becomes boring, as you can only cut down a tree in so many ways. Finally, we come to the last and most story-oriented of the three pillars that hold the forest together: adventure and progress. Throughout the game you will come across openings in hills or the floor which will contain leads of rope which can be used as scaffolding to enter the interconnected web of caves underneath the overworld, which reveal entire underground colonies of cannibals, mutants, and even cannibal babies. These areas are where you will find all of the different items you need to progress in the story, such as the climbing axe, rebreather, and the keycard. You can also find more hidden, out-of-the-way items such as chainsaws and modern bows by risking it and going deeper. In these caves you will also find pieces of your son Timmy's toy, which can be put together if you find all 6 pieces. You can also find drawings and other environmental storytelling that helps piece together the story of the forest. Now, at some point during your playthrough you will come across the sinkhole, a massive gaping hole in the middle of the map with a crashed helicopter and a mysterious doorway at the bottom. This is actually where you start the end of the game, but you can't get down here without going through multiple cave systems and using various pieces of equipment. Once you make it to the bottom, you can reach the final part of the game where all the pieces fall into place. If you still feel like playing the forest and don't want the ending spoiled, skip ahead to this timestamp. For about 98% of the runtime for the forest, you are running around an island rich with flora and fauna, sneaking around caves and killing or being killed by deadly cannibals. This all changes at the end. In a span of mere minutes you are thrown from your normal day exploring a cave to a secret underground test facility run by scientists, which has seemingly become abandoned after one or more of their subjects broke free. Investigation makes it very clear that the inhabitants of the island were either being monitored without their knowledge, or the cannibals had been used as test subjects for various secret experiments. You see some of these experiments in the form of a giant cell filled with human flesh and bodies, seemingly alive yet unable to communicate or move. There are also various cannibals scattered around the place, raiding supplies lost in the white, unnatural corridors. Here is where you finally discover where your son has been kept, and the final pieces fall into place. Your plane crash was no accident. It was a deliberate ploy by another father to revive their kid, as you need a human sacrifice to revive your child, who was also used as a sacrifice for the previous kid, Megan. But in your search through the laboratory for a suitable host, you find that the results of this resuscitation are not all sunshine and rainbows, as you can find the previous father dead, with Megan only a few rooms away. This begins the boss fight where you fight a mutated version of Megan with multiple limbs in a deadly range of attacks. After killing the mutated Megan, you can then attempt to put her in the chamber to sacrifice her, but are unable to use a dead body. This leads to the canonical ending of causing another plane to crash, and using that kid continuing the cycle. Or you can choose to end the cycle and leave him there, living out your remaining days on the island. But the canonical ending is the one where you save Timmy, so yeah, you rescue your son and that's it, game end. Until your son starts rapidly convulsing during a talk show. But that's a problem for the sequel to figure out. Now, the biggest issues I have with the forest boil down to 2 things: repetitivity and loneliness. If you play the forest solo, it can be a good time, but it truly shines with other people. Otherwise, I'd have gotten about 10 hours in and called it a day. I get that it's a survival game, but I just can't find the fun in grinding for hours to build a base, only for it to be completely useless. And it has quite a few bugs where they seem to have forgotten to make everything solid, as there are quite a few places where you can no-clip into the ground or walls. Overall, I'd give it a pretty solid 8 out of 10. After the Forest's official release on the 30th of April, 2018, it was only a month later that support for the virtual reality headsets was implemented as a way to up the horror and immerse players in a new and exciting way. This is all I have to say on the matter, as I have never played the Forest VR. Following the full release and consecutive updates to the game, there was near radio silence for more than a year until the Game Awards 2019, where Sons of the Forest was officially announced as the working title for the next game in the series. As of writing, it is still unreleased due to pushbacks caused by Endnight not wanting to force crunch onto developers and actually caring about the final product. This is where the Forest's story ends, for the time being at least. And that concludes the third episode of Development Devil, the show by gamers for gamers. Until next time, may all your games be good ones.